I think it's incredible, when we first started, like I mentioned, people thought it was illegal. And now just 12, 13 years later, for me to be able to say food rescue and people know what that means is, I think, remarkable, right? I just feel like with this kind of momentum, I feel like in another 10, 15 years, I really do think that food rescue will become the universal standard, right? And it becomes the thing that restaurants and food businesses do because it's common sense.
Welcome to TRIIBE Talk, where we alternate between young changemakers and long-standing leaders doing work in the social impact space. We're here with Robert Lee today, leading Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, who's going to share more about your experience and the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. First, I will say, our podcasts are sponsored by Raise, a mobile-first platform powering individual activism, nonprofit fundraising, and corporate giving. Download Raise on the App Store or on Google Play today to give, volunteer, and connect.
Streamer. TRIIBE Talk is a streamer studio production. Stream your podcast, stream your story, stream yourself. Try it free at streamr.nyc. Make your voice, brand, and message seen and heard on every platform today.
So, Robert, I'd love to start and dive in on what was the spark, perhaps, that motivated you to do work in Rescuing Leftover Cuisine?
Yeah, the spark really for how we started Rescuing Leftover Cuisine was a personal one. My parents came here looking for a better life, typical immigrant story, but they struggled. They didn't know the language, and essentially, my dad was a civil engineer in Korea, came here and couldn't find equivalent work, ended up working as a supermarket manager. And my mom was actually a bank teller in Korea and came here and couldn't find any work. And so I just grew up thinking that food insecurity was just a normal circumstance, that everyone was struggling to find food. And so it was only when I went to school and realized that other kids would be taking food for granted, just cute things, right? Like cutting off the ends of sandwiches just because they didn't want to eat the crust, or throwing away baby carrots and apples and things like that into the trash. I honestly would just rescue that personally and, bring it home and eat it. And so to me, food was just something that was just so crucial, just so obviously important to life. And over time, I realized that food rescue was something that could be done on an institutional level, right? There were amazing organizations like City Harvest and Food Bank of New York doing incredible work. And when I came across a club at NYU that brought leftover dining hall food to homeless shelters, I just got so obsessed with that. And that was really kind of, my first foray into food rescue, and eventually turned into this organization, Rescuing Leftover Cuisine.
That's fantastic. And how does it work? Because I know certainly you're a nonprofit, of course, but can you talk about your model and perhaps how it's not the norm for what's conceived of as nonprofit?
Absolutely, yeah. There's so many different, I think, preconceptions around nonprofits, but also around food rescue, right? I think when we first started in 2013, everyone thought it was illegal. And so I was actually working, I graduated in 2013 at NYU and ended up working full-time at JP Morgan in asset management. And yeah, people were like, you're quitting your job to do something illegal. And I think there's just so many different preconceptions around that. But we are structured as a 501c3 nonprofit, but we do charge for the services we provide, right? And so we, as a 501c3 nonprofit, rescue excess food from food businesses like restaurants, cafeterias that have, the food for corporate offices, catering companies for events, weddings, etc. And essentially, we bring that excess food to homeless shelters, food kitchens, food pantries, community centers, even schools that provide food to people who are food insecure, right? And so by doing that, it allows our food businesses to get enhanced tax deductions. They can reduce their food disposal costs. So they have a lot of really, good value from that. And so it's interesting to think about because a lot of people don't realize that nonprofits charge all the time, right? Like you pay tuition to go to college, right? Like you pay admission fee to go to a museum, right? Like these things are in our common, day-to-day things. And so I think, people don't really realize that and are surprised whenever nonprofits charge, for services. But yeah, I think, some of these things are a little bit atypical in the nonprofit space. But I do hope that more social entrepreneurs take this into account as they kind of try to find ways to make a little bit more of a sustainable impact, financial sustainability. Yeah.
And your organization is B2B, right?
B2B, that's correct.
So
yes.
also, I think you're redefining that, like, being a nonprofit doesn't mean actually serving directly the community.
Doesn't always have to.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of businesses, right, and all kinds of organizations. There's different advantages from B2B to B2C, and depends on what type of problem you're trying to solve, really.
Right. And talk to me about, like, the community helping you solve the problem. You mentioned that there's, 10,000 people that have signed up on your website to help out. Talk to me about how that works, what they actually do, and how you've expanded since your start.
Absolutely. I mean, the community in general is just so important, right? If you think about Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, we really are just a kind of like middleman between all these different parties, right? The food donor businesses, the volunteers who transport the excess food, and then the nonprofit recipients who are distributing ultimately to people who are food insecure, right? And there's so many different parties involved, and that community from each of these disparate areas and stakeholders really make this whole thing function, right? And so it's just so important. The food donor partners who sign on to work with us, who package the food, to make sure that allergens are labeled and all this stuff, right? To the volunteers, like you mentioned, there's thousands and thousands of volunteers who sign up on our website, just rescuingleftovercuisine.org. There's a calendar where you can just sign up and look at a map and see who can, what areas you want to do, what times you want to sign up for. Of course, the nonprofit recipients who ultimately take that excess food, store it, or distribute it immediately. And there's just so much work that goes to it. For our volunteers specifically, the volunteer community is also just something that is, I think, just crucial to the work that we do, right? Like they're doing this in the snow, in the rain, hail, any heat, any condition. They're rescuing that food to ensure it doesn't go to waste.
Another thing that I'm very curious about, right? You mentioned there's lots of volunteers, but also you have employees that help out, especially for work on the off hours or things of that nature. Can you talk to me about how you balance the two, what made that switch, and especially, I think, right, this is a pivotal time. We have a lot of holidays coming up, what that means to the fluctuation of volunteers.
Yeah, there's, I think, a lot of different considerations when we decided to try to expand and grow beyond a certain level of food donor partners. As we really kind of relied on volunteers to be that transportation solution, we realized that volunteers have the same kind of schedules, right? They have the same, if they're a student, the same midterm season, the same final season, right? They have the same spring break, they have the same, and I think across the board, people also, have plans on Friday nights and may have, children on weekends and things like that. And so, I think in general, we realized that there were harder slots to fill on the volunteer calendar and decided, hey, to provide a professional level of service, we need to diversify this mix. And so we decided to have essentially 1099s, kind of independent contractors who were paid to do some of the pickups as well, and introduce that mix so that we can really increase the reliability, increase the professionality, and ensure that our food donor partners get the right service that they're paying for ultimately. And also our nonprofit recipients get that regular supply of food so that they don't have to buy it, right? And so that kind of mix definitely was something that evolved over time. I'm sure will continue to evolve over time. And as you mentioned, during this time of year, it's just very difficult, right? I mean, it's getting colder, right? More and more people are going to different food assistance programs to eat. This whole man-made crisis of the SNAP benefits, is also ridiculous, also causing a huge increase in demand. But also after the pandemic, a lot of pandemic assistance programs disappeared, and so more people are actually facing food insecurity right now than during the pandemic. It's almost double. And so this problem is something that has persisted and is really, really tough right now. One of the benefits, of course, during the holidays is that people do turn their attention to this, right? And so people do want to help out and really want to, support. But it is something that I always like to kind of emphasize, that it is something that we need all throughout the year, right? It's not something that just happens during the cold. It's all year round.
Do you find like you hit capacity then on those days of volunteering?
Hit capacity in terms of too many volunteers?
Yeah.
Well, I think it is one of those things where, as we've grown, we definitely have got to the point where we have a lot of volunteers who check our website, and it's to the point where sometimes we have a food dinner partner that joins on, and then we put it on the calendar, and immediately someone picks it up. And so that has been a really great kind of validation of people really wanting to do something good for their community, and also fighting this dual problem of food waste and food insecurity. And so we are also thinking broadly about how volunteers can help, right? And so we do also, right now have a bottleneck of trying to find more food dinner partners, right? And so volunteers can help us spread the word, right? Ask their favorite restaurant, their favorite food business, what do they do with their excess food, right? Mm-hmm. Tell them about an opportunity like, Rescuing Leftover Cuisine or City Harvest or Food Bank of New York or any food rescue organization, really. I think people don't realize that their dollar votes really do make a huge difference, right? When they show businesses that, they care about something and they care about an issue, they're willing to spend their money where businesses align with them, that makes a huge difference. And so I would recommend, more people kind of sign up to volunteer to help us spread that word and get more food donor partners on board.
What about in general with like the quality of volunteers is something that often comes into question in the nonprofit space.
For sure.
Like the reliability of someone to ensure that the food is picked up and dropped off. Do you have struggles with that?
Oh yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the things that we faced during that kind of transition period of as we scaled and bring on more and more food donor partners, but realizing, hey, like the quality of service that we're providing is slipping, right? We wanted to make sure that we were always professional, and that's why we introduced that mix of independent contractors and different folks to ensure that we can keep that professionality as strong as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, unfortunate. I think volunteer, power is something that's tremendous and incredible. But I do think that, rightfully, people should focus on their health, their, jobs, their families, and then volunteer when they can, right? And so that happens sometimes where, sometimes they have to prioritize other things.
I'd like to pivot and dive more into how this started, right? You graduated college and you did switch to JP Morgan.
Yeah, right? That's right.
And then after a year you quit.
That's right.
And switched
That's
over.
Right.
So you touched on it a little bit, but tell me more about the decision making, not just externally, but also like with family and friends. And then in terms of like the work you were doing that 1 year, as you were juggling both.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there, right? I think, it's just a funny story, just because, for the first year, it was a shock, right, for my parents and my family, right? I think, I gave them ample notice. I told them, hey, like, I'm gonna quit. I think they just thought it was a joke or thought it was like me just complaining, and plenty of people complain about their jobs, and I think that definitely, is something that, is a shock. But also my parents were like the very first donors of RLC, right? And so they're very supportive. But they didn't talk to me for the first year of me starting RLC. They were like, you wasted everything, right? Like all the hard work, all the sacrifice they made to come here. They thought that, giving up a stable job, and everything I worked for essentially in their eyes, was wasted, right? I think that, and it only took them a few years to kind of realize that, like, all of that sacrifice was also to give me the opportunity to do something like this, right? And I think, that did take some time, but that's always something that I think is hilarious, because I think a lot of people will resonate with that, right? Like that there is a bit of conflict there of like the fear of the unknown, but I think it's worth it, right? I think it's worth it to kind of try. The decision making, as you asked, like, I was young. I didn't have a mortgage or family or anything to really kind of be worried about, and I could take this risk, right? And so that was kind of part of the decision making I did. I do also recommend making a budget, making sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. Taking a pay cut, obviously a huge deal. I definitely missed that for many years. But it's just one of those things where you have to kind of know what your own limits are and understand kind of what you're getting yourself into. I also made some kind of goals for myself internally in terms of where RLC should be. And if RLC didn't meet those milestones and targets, I would just go back to business school or pursue something else.
Right.
But thankfully, things have been really incredible. I'm really fortunate to feel that we are making some difference in this problem and trying to make food rescue the universal standard. I think it's incredible, when we first started, like I mentioned, people thought it was illegal. And now just like, 12, 13 years later, for me to be able to say food rescue and people know what that means is, I think, remarkable, right? I just feel like with this kind of momentum, I feel like in another 10, 15 years, I really do think that food rescue will become the universal standard, right? And it becomes the thing that restaurants and food businesses do because it's common sense. What else would you do with excess food anyways, right? And so, that's what we're aiming for.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on one hand about how to prioritize your own dream over your parents and how to be grateful of how much effort they put into creating the opportunity for you to, well, in their eyes, like follow their dream, but also it means living with a lot of intentionality.
For sure.
Right? And to have the larger term vision that you're right. I think we do talk a lot more about recycling, compost, and a circular economy of sorts. And so you've certainly played a huge part in New York of developing that at scale.
Hopefully, yeah. We still have a lot of work to do, but yeah, little by little.
What about like some of the quirks, right? Some of the like mishaps or mistakes or struggles.
In terms of mishaps and quirks, I think one example is just when we, maybe like 3 years in, we were really ambitious with trying to really tackle any kind of excess food. And we had started off with kind of our bread and butter main operation of working with businesses that had recurring food donations. But then there was an opportunity to try and work with on-demand services. So let's say we were working with a restaurant that had, daily food donations, but then every once in a while they had a mishap with ordering or inventory. And they would call us and ask us, hey, like, we need to donate all this stuff. And we just kind of got into this mission creep type of thing, which is common for nonprofits because you want to do so much and you only have limited resources, right? And so it was one of those things where we overextended ourselves, and we realized when doing the math and doing the operations that it was costing us way more to do these operations, and there wasn't as much benefit, right? For recurring donations, our nonprofit recipients can know, hey, plus or minus 5-10 pounds, this is what I'm going to get. With on-demand services, they just get a whole bunch of food, and sometimes they don't know what to do with it, and so that causes more costs, more burden. Just sometimes even more just waste, right? And so there's just no point in bringing waste to waste if it's not going to be used. And so, things like that were definitely things that we had to really kind of experience to realize, and to realize that it's okay to say no. Like, we need to figure out what we're good at and be really, really good at that one thing. And I think that that's a common mistake I see a lot of people who are trying to start nonprofits really do, because the mission is just so strong, and it's like, of course you would want to rescue that food, right? Like, what a waste. But I think structuring it in the right way, figuring out how to do it is really the key.
Right. I think we have, on one hand, the desire to share when things are outside of our system, and encourage others to get involved and solve it, if we can use this as a means to label problems. But
absolutely,
I think on one hand, there's the entrepreneurial spirit of pivot. Learn to pivot and move fast, like
100%.
grow. But at the same time, after a few years especially, it's stay true to your mission, right?
Exactly.
And you're right. Nonprofits have this idea that it's so mission-driven. I think every company, in some way, at least wants to be, and should be mission-driven, right? It's your purpose.
Absolutely.
It's your value.
Absolutely.
We have this new generation that almost all of them want purpose-driven work.
100%.
How do you make sure that when you go home, you're not, like you mentioned, perhaps more pay, but complaining about the work that you have, or upset, and instead coming home grateful that you've made the most of your day?
Yeah, 100%.
What's the largest no that you've ever had to make then?
Man. I mean, that was definitely a bigger no. I think like personally, there's always a conflict when there's excess food and we can rescue it. I think, there's been a lot of no's, including even just with hiring, right? I mean, I think, right now with so many talented people out there and people who are, looking to make a difference, like you said, there are a lot of people who want to kind of make a difference, and it's a hard no, right? It's difficult to kind of, to kind of have that stance, but sometimes it's just not sustainable financially. It's not able. We're not able to bring on all the different things and projects that people want to, do. And so that's definitely, another piece.
Right.
Yeah.
What about in general? Right, you have a mission and you're doing work, and to your point, right, we could go deep down a rabbit hole about team and the difficulties in hiring and firing as a nonprofit too, because there is this misconception, like nonprofits can do both of those effectively. But what about just keeping to the broader sense, how do you make sure that the volunteers as well as your employees are like motivated, appreciated, encouraged, things of that nature?
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough, especially in kind of a more resource-constrained kind of environment with nonprofits. I think, financial compensation is definitely one of those things that is not as much of a driver. It's obviously required and necessary to survive and live. But in terms of motivation, I think a lot of team members and especially people in the nonprofit space are definitely more driven by the impact that they can make, right? And I think that the way we do that is by sharing stories of our impact and making sure that people know what their work is actually contributing to and what it actually means at the end of the day. I think that's sometimes goes further than just dollars.
Right. So to dive into perhaps like final thoughts, I'm curious about not only where the future holds for your work, and you've touched upon this, you've touched upon the macro goals, your vision, not just your mission, but what about for the perception of food insecurity, right? What do you think, or maybe repackaging what you've said earlier to simplify, what do you think is most important that people understand about the challenge you're addressing?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I would love for people to kind of understand. I think, I always hesitate to kind of, dive into so many, statistics and things because I feel like it's going to bore people.
Well, go for it.
But truly, I mean, it's just a massive issue, right? And there's so many different facets. And I think, just on top of the fact that it's just kind of ridiculous that we have these two problems coexisting, if you just take food waste alone, we're wasting almost 40% of the food that we produce in this country. And obviously 40% just sounds like a lot, but it constitutes a lot, right? Like all the food that we produce comes from using half the US land, 10% of our energy budget, 80% of our fresh water, and then wasting 40% of that is ridiculous, right? It's all these natural resources. And then wasting it doesn't actually, allow it to just kind of rot in nature. it actually gets piled on top of each other in landfills and goes through anaerobic digestion, which produces methane gases that are 30 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide. So it's a double whammy, right? We're using natural resources to produce food, waste it, and then it goes to landfills to make it worse for the environment, right? And so in general, like, we have an opportunity 3 times a day to eliminate or reduce our carbon footprint, and I think people are busy planting trees, right? I feel like there's something kind of off about that, right? And I think there's other facets to this, right? It's not just environmental, it's ethical too. Like, we're raising animals, slaughtering them for no reason, right? And so, like, there's all these other aspects, right? It's a huge economic issue, right? As I mentioned, 10% of the energy budget. Why do we subsidize food like corn just to waste it, right? Like, there's just so many different implications to just food waste alone. And then on the food insecurity side, obviously it's a massive issue, and it's a personal one for me. There are people facing food insecurity, and there's so many misconceptions around, oh, why don't they just get a job? Like, that kind of thing, right? Like, a lot of these people, especially in New York City, a lot of them are elderly. A lot of them are elderly women, pay taxes all their lives. They have, health issues or, various things that have, culminated in them having to rely on food assistance programs, right? And so I think, people have different ideas around, like, what that looks like, and they don't realize, people who are food insecure are also children. Like, I don't think I could have gotten a job,
Right.
And it's just kind of ridiculous, right? I just feel like, there's a lot of those things that I would love people to kind of, realize or think about. But
You make a great point about how if 80% of our water, fresh water, goes to food and 50% is wasted, or basically by the math, a third of our water is being wasted.
That's right.
Then food insecurity alone is contributing to some of the water crises happening.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then on top of it, you've also tackled the fact that the perception of who needs this food, which I must admit I wasn't considering in jumping into this. What does it mean to be someone who needs food support?
Yeah.
Right? And who are the people that are actually going out? And to recognize that it's holistic, it's not just those that you would assume are struggling directly or visibly, but it's the ones that may be quietly suffering.
Exactly.
And rely on these programs to maintain themselves. So thank you so much first on the work you're doing to contribute in that quiet problem, but also for dedicating yourself towards a mission that actually helps advance externalities to the market.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me and helping spread the word. This is just something that is just so important. And everyone can make a difference, right? As I mentioned before, people can just ask their favorite food business, what do they do with their excess food, right? And that alone just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, well, listen, Robert, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to all of our listeners, supporters. Certainly, I must ironically say, like and subscribe to help share this message and your message, really, about what we're trying to do. Because I think not only is this going to be educational for those that are learning more about food insecurity and the opportunities there, will it be opportunistic for those that might be able to collaborate with you, but also for those that are looking to make impact themselves at a younger stage and say, well, how do I get involved? How do I start solving the problems I'm seeing on social media instead of just continuously scrolling?
100%.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Cheers. TRIIBE Talk is a streamer studio production. You can view more at www.triibe.us. That's tribe with 2 I's. Try Streamer today at www.streamr.nyc. We're very grateful to the team that made this happen. Executive producer David Walters, videography and editing by David Walters, graphic design by Tristan Bresnan, and hosted by me, Kyle Mathis. Thank you so much for watching.